Hello and welcome to CBSE Economics segment. We will continue with our first chapter, India on the Eve of Independence of Class 12 Economics, CBSE syllabus. We had already discussed about the agriculture sector in the previous video. Today we will continue with the industrial sector. As we started the agriculture sector with the pre-British era, how was the situation like? We need to know that also before. So we are starting in the similar lines. We can know how was the industrial sector during the pre-British era. So India was famous for its handicraft industries, known for its quality and craftsmanship, even though it might not be having the finesse of it may not be so fine as it is made in industries. But the beauty of handcraft product is that every product is unique on its own, right? So it had good quality, it had great craftsmanship, and the handicraft industry of India was known worldwide. It had a global reputation, particularly in textiles. Okay. Now moving on to the next page. Deindustrialization under the British rule. So British systematically deindustrialized our existing handicraft industries because they wanted India to be completely dependent upon them, upon them. So they systematically destroyed Indian handicraft industries. So the question can come: how Britishers systematically deindustrialized Indian handicraft industry? Okay, what all Britishers did in order to deindustrialize our existing handicraft industries. So the reason which led to deindustrialization is because of the policies of the Britishers, that is exploitation of the raw materials. Britishers took all the exploitation, leaving our own producers with nothing, and they sent all the raw materials free of cost and very cheap, at a very cheap rate, and they manipulated the market. How did they manipulate it? They took all the raw materials at a cheaper rate. They produced the final product in Britain and sent it back to India to sell it back to our people. And they earned a huge profit. And that's how they very unfair means they manipulated the market and earned a lot. Right? Now, something we will discuss related to this is discriminatory tariff policy, right? The next point is the poor state of industries was because of discriminatory tariff policy. What was the discriminatory tariff policy? So the British policies were designed only to favor them, only to benefit them. So key aspect of tariff policy is no duty was charged on the import of British goods to India. So whatever they were making in their country, taking the raw materials from us at a very cheaper rate, and they're sending us, getting a big market like India, and not having to pay any tariff. Just imagine. Imagine how funny it is, how exploitative it is, right? So heavy duty was imposed on the Indian exports. Whereas Indian exporters were charged hugely. Now, it's just like हम दोनों रेस भागेंगे, एक आदमी 50 मीटर आगे खड़ा होगा, एक आदमी 50 मीटर पीछे, है ना? So it's so unfair. It's like running a race with Usain Bolt. Keeping Usain Bolt 50 meters ahead of you, you're bound to lose. It's not fair at all. So heavy duty was imposed, unfair competition led to the decline of handicrafts. Right? Then there's adverse effect. Now, since so many people were dependent on handicraft industry, right? Now, after the decline of handicraft industries, it is quite clear that India was going to suffer. The people were going to suffer. So what all effects happened after the handicraft industries declined? High amount of unemployment. Yes, people who were so much dependent on the handicraft industries lost their job, right? And was forced into agriculture because there was nothing else to do, and India was an agrarian society where about 80% of the people resided in rural India, led to overpopulation in villages and disguised unemployment. We all know what disguised unemployment is. Okay, there is a need for 2 workers and there is 10 workers working. Okay, so the rest of the 8 are not having any productivity, they're just there engaged. So, too much of overpopulation, dependence on the imported goods. We did not produce anything. We were not reliant on ourselves. So, and it was the policy of the Britishers to make us like that indeed. That's the reason why there is too much of dependence on imported goods. Foreign made goods replaced the handmade goods because, again, the cost factor comes to play. They were producing it in a factory. They were getting the raw materials at a very cheaper rate, right? And that is replacing our handmade goods, which made our people suffer, right? Indian demand was made through British imports instead of local production. So we were not producing anything. We were totally made to be reliant or dependent on the British, right? Now, another point is lack of capital goods industries. Now, capital goods are those industries, which produces machineries and those tools which are used for further production, right? So, they were all not developed in India, and of course, if capital goods are not developed, the technologies will not develop, there will be no innovations, nothing was there, it was not encouraged. British discouraged capital investments in India to keep it totally dependent on Britishers. So their whole motive was to keep India very dependent on them, so that they are not questioned, so that India do not become, the people do not become strong enough to question them or challenge them. So that is the sole motive. The next point in this would be low contribution to GDP. Now, you can also say, the question can come, what is the state of industrial sector during the British, right? Okay? Or how did Britishers deindustrialize the Indian handicraft industries? So, and what were the consequences of it? So, questions can come in different manner. Now, the other point is low contribution to GDP, as there is no industries that were developed, no capital industries that were developed. So, the contribution to GDP was very small, and limited role of public sector, because the Britishers were ruling, they were not reinvesting it back, and their investment, all the public investment, was focused on railways, power and ports, which were again benefiting the Britishers alone. And I've just given a flowchart here, industrial sector during the British rule, and these are all the state of industrial sector during the British rule. Okay, these are the state of industrial sector during the British rule: deindustrialization and decline of handicraft industry, adverse effect of the decline of the handicraft industry, lack of capital good industries, low contribution to GDP, and limited role of public sector. These are all the state. These are all the state of. These are all the points to be mentioned when you are answering the state of industrial sector during the British rule. Okay, so these are all the reasons. These are all the causes. And next point is the major industries operating during independence. So during independence, as we know, we already know that the Britishers did not let us improve our technology, improve our industries, modernize our industry. So there are a handful of the industries which were operating when the Britishers left India, right? So private sector left some industrial groups, very few, late 19th century. Okay, after the late 19th century, that is post 1850s. After the 1850s, there was some growth in the private industries. The Tata Iron and Steel Company, that is TISCO, was established in 1907. Even though the Tata Company was well before that, but the Tata Iron and Steel Company, the modern industry, was set up during 1907. Right? After World War II, some industries like cement, paper, and chemical began to develop. This is World War II, that is in the midst of 1914. That was when the paper, chemicals, cement industry started developing in India. Before that, it was not there. Right? Now, we go on to the next topic. That is foreign trade during the British rule. Right? Now, what's state of foreign trade? So, what was the state of foreign trade? The state of the foreign trade during the British rule. Now, we were, as we know, exporter of raw materials and importer of finished goods. Right? We were exporting raw materials, we were merely made a feeder economy. We discussed that right in the first slide only. We were the feeder economy. Right? India exported raw materials like cotton, jute, indigo, and sugar, imported finished goods from Britain, damaging Indian industries overall. So, British had overall monopoly control over the Indian industries and Indian economy. So, the trade policies favored only the Britishers, restricting India's trade with other countries. So, it only favored the Britishers. It also restricted the Indian industries to do business with do the trade with other countries. We were only restricted to do trade with China, Sri Lanka, and Persia, right? So India's foreign trade was mainly limited to Britain, with 50% of the trade was being done with Britain, and rest of it was allowed with some countries only, right? Then the next point would be the drain of Indian wealth during the British rule. So India's export-import imbalance. Now, India became an exporter of raw materials and an importer of finished goods. We know, being an economics student, that export is better, right? Having more export is better, because we are getting in the inflow of foreign currency, right? A foreign exchange is getting better. But here, the thing is that even though we were a large exporter, we were only an exporter of raw materials. And even though whatever benefit we were making out of this export, everything was being used by the Britishers for their own benefit. Was to finance their wars, the amount of wars they were getting involved in, the administration work, and all those sort of things. So despite having trade surplus, India did not benefit from it, and the reasons I've already told you. Okay? And there are reasons: payments for the expenses of administration in Britain, meeting cost of wars fought by the British government, import of invisible items like services, militaries, expenses, pensions, everything was done through the surplus that was earned through the Indian economy, and they used it. Absolute exploitation of it. Right? The next point. Now, this is the interesting topic where Suez Canal has come to play. Now, Suez Canal started in 1869. It reduced the distance between India and Britain by huge numbers. For about 7,000 kilometers of route was shortened. because of the opening of the Suez Canal. And this made Britishers further control over the Indian economy tightly. So it reduced the cost and time of transportation between India and Britain, and made trade easier and faster. So impact on India strengthened the British control over India, increased British economic exploitation, limited trade with countries, making India dependent totally on Britain. So this is diagram in the book also. Here it's India, and there is Africa over here, right? And Suez Canal went directly like this. Whereas before they had to go from here, right? Take the divergent route from Cape of Good Hope. And this route was very difficult. Now they could go directly to Britain, and that's how the time and cost was saved. And the distance reduced about 7,000 kilometers we have already discussed. Now, demographic condition during the British rule. Now, what is a demography? Demography is nothing but a study of population. You are studying the population of a country or any typical any area we are talking about. So, demographic is a study of a population. Now, what about demography? What was our population of? What were they engaged in? So, we will do all this study. First official census was taken in 1881. Since then, every 10 years we've been taking the census. This marked the beginning of organized population data that has been collected. Before that, there was no official or any organized data that was collected. It showed slow and uneven population growth because there was high birth rate and as well as high death rate. So the growth of population was slow and uneven, right? So census continued every 10 years after 1881. 1921, mark you, this is very important year, is known as year of Great Divide. Why? Because before 1921, high birth rate and high death rate was there, which led to population growth being very stagnant. Growth, even if it was there, was very meager, very small, right? But after 1921, the population of India has only been growing. There has been no decline in it, and the growth has been very sustained after 1921 as the death rate started declining, leading to a continuous rise in population. And 1921 marked the demographic transition known as the year of Great Divide, right? Till here, the population was growing in a very minimum number. It was not stagnant, it was not even, right? But after 1921, we can see that every 10 years, we can see that population has only been growing. Okay, the next point is demographic condition. Now, what was the condition of people, right? Now, the demographic condition of the British rule was stagnant and backward. Yes, the people in India was backward, right? And there was high birth rate, high death rate, poor health care, low literacy, and widespread poverty that we all know. So, British policies worsened the living conditions of the people in India. Okay. High birth rate and death rate. We all know what birth rate is, we know what death rate is, right? We don't need to go through this again. So there was high birth rate and high death rate pre-1921. So after that there was a year of Great Divide, again the population has always been growing. And the reason for uneven growth was high birth rate followed by high death rate. Right now, what was the condition in terms of literacy and healthcare? Overall literacy was very poor. It was less than than 16%, which is mentioned here, and with female it was less than or it was just 7%. Very low. India today has about 70% literacy rate, but those days, see the condition, it was 16 or even less than that, and 7 among the women. Public healthcare was almost non-existent, right? And diseases like cholera, waterborne diseases, malaria and tuberculosis were common. Infant mortality rate, that is the death of the child before the reach of 1 year, right? The number of child who dies before they attain the age of 1 year, right? So per thousand live births. So that is infant mortality rate, and infant mortality rate was whooping 280 per thousand. That means per thousand live births, it was probable that the probability was that about 218 children would not survive post 1 year, right? I am infant mortality rate. We know what definition is 218 deaths per thousand live births, right? Under the British rule. Now, today, the IMR is around 27 of India, and Kerala state has a very good IMR of only 7, right? And there are states which are in India which are worse than this, and that again talks about regional variation, right? Even today. The life expectancy was just 32 years. Now, what we are doing is, remember, we are studying the demography and the condition of demography during the British. And demography is study of population, right? We are saying there are healthcare, education, right? Life expectancy is also part of health, and 32 was only the life expectancy of the people then. Widespread poverty was there, high taxation, economic drain and famines was very common, and no reliable data was put forth. In order to study and analyze, some data has to be there. Some people have to have an organized setup to study that, but that was sadly not there, and no reliable data is there. Low wages, food shortages, and poor living conditions. That was what the condition of the demography of India was at that time, right? Now, understanding the occupational structure. What is occupational structure? That means what occupation was the Indian demography or the Indian people dependent on? What was the occupational structure like? So, refers to the distribution of workers across different sectors, mainly being the primary, secondary, tertiary sector. We don't need to discuss about that, we all know, right? So, what was the occupational structure like? Yes, the occupational structure. Predominance of agriculture, that's primary sector, about 70 to 75 people were dependent on agriculture, industries and services recorded very low. There was almost no development there. Manufacturing sector, it was only 10% of people were dependent on it, and services only 50%. As we know, Indian industries were not at all developed. It was not given any priority to develop. And our people was illiterate, or mainly illiterate, only 16% of literacy rate. With that, we cannot expect the service sector also to be so much, and people, mainly the Britishers, were involved in the service sector. Now, lack of modernization in farming was one of the leading cause as to why the production was very low, right? Limited growth of secondary sector, we have already discussed that. The British policy used to discourage the Indian industry to, grow, and it only promoted the British goods. Handicraft industries, which we were so good in, that was our identity. They lost that as well, and the manufacturing sector was stagnant and small. There was no growth in the manufacturing sector. sad, sad state, right? And there was an underdeveloped territory, tertiary sector, and tertiary sector was also underdeveloped. The services like transport, because the roads were not quite linked. The railways, the roads that was built, that was only to benefit the Britishers to go from one port to the railway station and from one place to the other, which was only benefiting the Britishers and the trade, right? So the service sector like transport, finance, education, healthcare was all having very limited growth. Mostly government jobs and administrative roles was controlled by the Britishers, and lack of modern banking and financial institutions was also causing huge underdevelopment of the tertiary sector. Now, in today's day and age, India's tertiary sector is well developed, and it is in fact the most contributing sector to the GDP. However, the people dependent on it is still less, right? Now, regional variation in the workforce, there was regional variation, that is, every region varied within India also, according to the development, according to the growth, according to the occupational structure as well. And we see that Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Karnataka, Maharashtra, West Bengal saw a rise in the factory jobs, that means manufacturing sector, the service sector, because these were mostly from the key areas during the previous era. But there were many such states which remained dominant in other, in agriculture. As Odisha, Rajasthan, Punjab continued to rely heavily on farming. So there was regional variation. They did not develop everything in a similar way, right? And mind you, these are all part of Madras presidency and Bombay presidency. This was the important area back then. So that's the reason why some factory jobs has been developed. But we don't see any development as such in the state of Punjab, Odisha, Rajasthan, etc. Okay, they still rely usually on agriculture. So, impact of the British policies on occupation. So, how did British policies impacted the occupation of people? So, India became a supplier of raw materials for the British industries. India became a supplier of raw materials for British industries, in feudal economy, lack of employment opportunities in non-agriculture sector, led to widespread poverty, as all the people were dependent on agriculture, and how many people would agriculture sustain? There was overpopulation in agriculture, and as a result there was lack of employment opportunities in other areas, and which leading to heavy poverty. No significant effort were made by the Britishers to develop India's modern industries, and that was only done to keep us dependent on them entirely. Now, if we talk about the infrastructure, we want to talk about the infrastructure of the British, right? The state of infrastructure during the British. The state of infrastructure was very poor. They were not developing much. The British developed whatever infrastructure just to benefit their own agendas, to serve their own economic and military interests. The focus on road, railways, ports, and telegraphs was there, but little investments were there in health, education, and housing. And even roads, railways, and ports were not made for us; it was made for their own good. Limited connectivity was there in terms of roads. Due to high cost and lack of funds, very limited construction was there. Primary purpose was just to transport the British troops and their goods, and not to benefit India. Poor connectivity, many villages were still not connected, they remained isolated and lived their life in hardship, and especially during famines and such natural calamities, they were used to be without food, which led to hunger and starvation as well. So railways were was introduced in 1850. The first train was from Bombay to Thane in 1853. So, while train plays a very important role, is that the railway is not just for India but for the whole world a great invention, right? And we will leading to paths to modernization with this invention. And India has also one of the longest connectivity in terms of railways. However, the British developed the railways, but it was done again for own selfish motive, and it did not serve any better to our people, right? So there are two impacts, positive as well as negative. Every side has every point has two sides. Sorry. So positive impact is helped in a long distance travel and trade. It further helped in reducing the geographical and cultural barriers. Now people before had to take days and days to travel from one place to another, and with that, the feeling of nationalism was not there. People used to feel from one kingdom to another, people are different. We were not together, right? We were not unified. Now, what the railway did was it made the traveling of a long distance very easy. So, people went from one place to another. They found out, okay, the people, even though they speak different language, they may have different culture, but we are not same. We are from the subcontinent. Right? It broke the geographical barrier and cultural barriers. Also, people started loving other cultures as well, and they started accepting people, and that unity started coming. And of course, the railways has made a positive impact in this regard. Whereas the negative impact was only promoted. Railways were made only to promote foreign trade, benefited only the British industries more than India, led to commercialization of agriculture, shifting focus from subsistence farming to the cash crop, which led to massive hunger and lack of food. Now, air and water transport, there's limited development of it as well. The coastal canal in Odisha was built expensively, but ultimately was abandoned due to inefficiency. And air transport saw minor advancements, with GRB Tata starting civil aviation. The communication, mostly the post telegraphs, was popular during that time. Electric telegraphs played a huge part. In those days, sending messages and connecting people was very difficult, and this telegraph gave them an opportunity to quickly transfer the message and reach out to the people. Postal services was inadequate, serving more of the British interest than the public benefit, of course. Okay. So now we see economic consequences of the British rule. So what were the economic consequences of the British rule? So by 1947, after they have ruled 200 years, the British rule led to slow economic growth and declining industries, over-dependence on agriculture and worsening poverty further, exploitative zamindar system. These are all the results, these are all the consequences of the British rule. Traditional and outdated agriculture, frequent famines and shortage of food, decline of Indian handicraft industries, and lack of proper investments. These are all the economic consequences of the British rule. Now, what we can conclude from here is that British policy favored their own economic interest, resulting in India's economic stagnation. Okay, widespread poverty, the hostile policies led to the complete economic ruin of the country. So, this is the conclusion of the British rule. Economically, we were completely ruined. They only did all the things, even if they did the good things, they did for their own economic benefit. Okay? India's economy was continuously under stagnation, poverty was ever increasing, and the hostile policies, the very cruel and hostile policies led to complete demotivation of the people of India. It ruined the economy of the country. Okay. Now, the question rises as to how British have exploited India's economy. Now, this is just a summary of the whole chapter. Now, we'll be doing a summary of the whole chapter. The last few topics of the chapter is all about the summary of what we have already done. British exploited India. How did British exploited India? It's overall. Now, we did it separately through agriculture sector, right? Industries, trade, etc. Right? We did it in various ways. Now we are compiling everything and telling that how Britishers exploited India's economy. Agriculture was completely backward, right? Low productivity, commercialization of agriculture, destruction in terms of handicraft industries, right? Which is starting from the industrial sector, and economic drain to Britain. Everything was looted, right? And systematically looted, made us dependent on Britain. They earned a huge amount of money through it. So this is all the summary of the chapter. Some positives, yes, there were some positives also. Like I said, the points have both sides. But with this point, there was like one point that was dominant, that was the negative side, right? When Britishers ruled, exploited India, right? It had a long-term benefit as well, infrastructurally. Despite low productivity, the total land under the cultivation increased, even though the productivity had decreased and the technology was outdated. Better transportation, roads and railways were built, even though it was built for their own benefit, but it paved the way for future economic growth. Check on famines to some extent. Railways helped to transport goods to different parts of the people, helping them during the famines, right? It also helped India shift to monetary system. India was largely into the barter system, and then the Britishers introduced the use of money, administrative setup after the British. This was the British government that introduced a structured administrative system in India, and they have adopted a lot from their constitution as well. Okay, which was later on used by independent India as well. That is also one of the positive aspects of the British rule. Okay, now Indian economy on the eve of independence. These are all the summary part of it. We don't need to discuss so much about it. We've already discussed hugely about agriculture, the industries, the foreign trade, the occupational structure, right? The demography of the people, so etc. We have discussed everything, and as we come to the conclusion, let me tell you that the CBSE is increasingly giving the competency-based questions. So the same simple things can be asked in a little twisted way. Read the questions properly, read the book properly, don't leave anything unturned, don't leave any stone unturned, and I wish you all the best. We will meet again when we will do the next chapter, that is Indian economy from 1950 to 1990. Thank you. Namaskar.